All right, everyone. I should be live. If I am actually live, please let me know. That way we can get started tonight. And I appreciate all of you being here for another Monday Night Live where we discuss current events relevant to preparedness and examples of why we need to keep preparing for whatever may come. And of course, I do want to mention that the biggest supporter of the channel is Midway USA. Thanks to them, I can do live streams like this and provide information that's relevant to you being better prepared, and they can provide you with other things that also help out in that regard. So big thanks to Midway USA. And of course, the live streams themselves are specifically sponsored by magicprepperbeef.com. Now, magicprepperbeef.com is where you can get shelf-stable, long-term survival beef products that are sous vide, ribeye, filet mignon, New York strip. And if you use the code magicprepper, you get 15% off. And this is not inexpensive, so you should be using it as a supplement to your preparedness pantry. Freeze-dried beef that'll last you throughout the apocalypse could be a good barter item. Also a good way to eat steak when no one else can. So that's magicprepperbeef.com. Use code magicprepper for 15% off. And let's start getting into the business of what we're talking about tonight. We got 5x5s coming in. We got Exile Reviews in the house modding tonight. I really appreciate you being here. 5x5s from Harbor Prepper. We've got, let's see, Robert P says 5x blank. So who knows what we're really looking or sounding like at this point. And Gregor Zamina says, get money by get paid. Here we are. These are the things that we do to keep things rolling forward, and I appreciate the understanding there. 5x56 says Dave Womack. That's how I know you're my kind of people, all right? Now, Steven says, let's go British Patriots. We're going to discuss that later tonight. Obviously, we have quite a bit on the lineup. We've got the Iranian attack on Israel imminent. We have the global stock market crash occurring right now. And we also have all the unrest in the UK, which I'm actually going to be using as an example of sorts. And once we get there, you'll understand what I mean by that. But you should be looking at that through a certain type of lens other than just why it's happening or the reasons for why the unrest is occurring, right? And you should be looking at it as, well, first off, a crystal ball in the sense of what we could expect here in our future in the US, but also as a predictable outcome, a solution, you might say, for those who had a problem that they wanted to fix. And here's the answer. So we're going to talk about that. Crazy California Fishing, $2, much appreciated for the super chat, says, do you have a P.O. box? I certainly do. If you'll reach out to me at magicprepper@gmail.com, we can discuss things and I can let you know what my P.O. box number is. Okay, so let's get rolling. A lot of stuff's happening. We're going to start with the Iran situation because that attack has been imminent for a few days now, 4 or 5 days now. And we know that something is on its way, but we're not sure what it is. But there are some things happening right now which could give us some ideas about how big this could actually become or what kind of escalation we could expect from it, thanks to those who are involved. So first off, let's talk about the fact that we have the Iranian president reiterating his threat to retaliate against Israel while meeting with Shoigu from Russia. So that gives you some ideas about what's happening here. This is actually from 3 hours ago. This article is relatively fresh. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian told Russia's Shoigu visiting Tehran that while his country is not seeking escalation, it will respond to Israel for the killing of Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh. The world is anxiously watching the rising tension between Iran and Israel as reports speak of a retaliatory Iranian attack sooner than later, which is something we're all being told, and we're just waiting. Right now, we're in this kind of weird holding pattern, and I want you to put yourself in the position of being someone who lives in Israel right now, right? Regardless of what you think is happening over in that region, who's at fault, who's done what, the politics of it all, and everything else. Just imagine being a regular person who lives in Israel right now, and for the last 4, 5, 6 days, you've just been sitting around wondering when rockets are going to start hitting the ground, right? So this is a very heightened, tense state of stress for the population and for those who are involved with emergency management and everything else. So understand that sometimes waiting is actually worse for the people who are being targeted than doing something immediately thereafter. I mean, this would be a difficult state of mind to maintain for this amount of time. And of course, the longer it goes on without a retaliatory attack, the more these people will get comfortable with the idea of something not probably happening. And that's when the attack has the most effect, right? So think about that. And I want you to always kind of use these conversations as a way to practically apply some of the information through our preparedness plans, right? Okay. Pezeshkian told that Iran is by no means seeking to expand the scope of the crisis in the region, but this regime will certainly receive a response for its crime and arrogance. The exact reason for Vladimir Putin's confidant, Shoigu, on Monday remained unclear. Whether Russia's former longtime defense minister went to Tehran to calm the situation or discuss military matters ahead of a possible war with Moscow's close ally remains unknown. Pezeshkian was also quoted as telling the Kremlin envoy that Russia has been one of the countries that has stood by the Iranian nation during difficult times. Developing relations with the strategic partner is a priority of the Islamic Republic of Iran's foreign policy, and there is a need to expedite the implementation of the agreements made between the two countries. So, this is global, right? This is not just Iran and Israel. This is Russia and the United States, right? Like this is how alliances work, and we know who's on what team at this point. And then we also have mention of China here. He also repeated that the Islamic Republic's standard position that together with Russia, China, and others, Tehran will oppose U.S. power and influence. We believe the era of dominance by certain powers, including the United States, has passed, and the shared positions and cooperation between Iran and Russia in promoting a multipolar world will certainly lead to greater global security and peace. Now, the only thing I would say about that is that not only do we have the name drop of China, so we know who's getting involved and who's being tapped in the sense of, hey, get ready for this to be a thing that we need your help with, right? But the other thing to keep in mind is they're talking about a multipolar world, but I don't buy that, right? It's going to be one way or the other. It's east versus west. I mean, that's where we're at this point in time. It's not my position, and that's not what I want to see happening. That's what those who are in power have created. And that's where we stand as of right now. I have zero doubt that if a coalition between Russia, China, Iran, and all the other Eastern powers who are on that part of the argument, I have zero doubt that they would easily allow it to be a singular polarity, right? They're going to be the only ones in charge, and that's all that's going to matter. So keep that in mind. But anyway, this threat is imminent. The attack is coming. Now, we have some unverified reports, which, by the way, I'm just continually kind of checking things to make sure that something hasn't updated during this live stream, because it is possible that an attack could happen right now for all. Right? We do not know what the attack is going to be or what it's going to look like, but I am going to be checking that as we go through this information. But we do have an unverified report that, was shared via OSINT that Russia delivered military support to Iran days before Iran's response to Israel, right? So this is reported from yesterday, August 4th. And this is Russian Galix Airlines, which specializes in arms transport, has landed in Tehran while the world awaits Iran's response to Israel. According to a report, Russia's IL-76 plane used for carrying weapons has arrived in Tehran, Iran. Neither the Russians nor the Iranians have commented on the report, nor has the Biden administration issued any statements. So, like I said, we don't have verified reports of this coming from these sources that you would usually rely on to say whether or not this is factual, but we have open source intelligence from flight tracking and everything else that we have access to, letting us know that this type of aircraft landed in Iran, and this is the type of aircraft generally used by Russia to transport arms. So it's very likely, because of the information I just shared with you and everything else that we know going into these events, that Iran is being well armed for this response. On Saturday, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard disclosed that Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas's political bureau, was assassinated in Tehran with a short-range missile. That has been debated and disputed at this point in time about being a lot of different things that it could have been, right? But regardless, that's the reasoning for why this imminent attack on Israel is, well, imminent. There is a huntsman spider trying to get into my drink right now. You got to go away. All right, I got him. Don't worry, I didn't get rid of them because honestly, I need their help. There's too many dang bugs in here. But I don't need them in my drink either. So that is at least peripheral evidence that there is the plans for something to happen there, possibly using advanced weaponry. We also have reports that are also unverified and generally only coming out of Israel. So there is a bias when it comes to this type of reporting, of course. But we have reports from Israel saying that Russia has given Iran air defense systems in anticipation of a counterattack. So obviously, there's good reason to believe that this is happening. It's not far-fetched, and it's not necessarily out of character. It's just something that you have to be aware of, not necessarily having that validation or that verification available, right? So Harry says it's almost Tuesday, and I agree because it is Monday. Let's see. The worst thing about the end of the days is that there never are, or they never are. I couldn't say that correctly, but Yardbirds, there you go. I read what you said, and I appreciate you being here. Let's see, JL. There will be wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. Well, let's hope the end is not yet, because that's not what I'm going for here. I just want this to go away. But you know what? I also understand that it's not going to. So at least be aware of what's happening so you can be better prepared for it. And when things really get bad, which they seem to be getting worse, right? Well, you won't be surprised. And honestly, surprise is a tactic used by your enemies, right? So don't be surprised, and then they can't use it against you. Now, let's see here. You definitely don't want to be able to not attack for 2 turns. Now, what's Israel saying about this entire situation? Well, they're getting ready for a quick transition to offense. So obviously, we know that this entire situation has the propensity to escalate out of control and possibly spiral into a much larger conflict. And every little action that happens has a reaction. And when does that end? When does the cycle stop, right? And you could say that there were calms and lulls in time when Iran wasn't necessarily striking Israel directly, but in between each of these little events, more stuff happens, and then the next time something bigger occurs, right? So it doesn't always happen directly thereafter or immediately and then continue on this linear path. Sometimes these things pop back in, but at a different level of escalation at that point in time. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing here based on the attack from Iran that happened in April, right? And we all thought everything was kind of chilling out after that. Well, now we're back on page 1, except for we're really on page 3 or 4, where things have gotten much more interesting in the story. At Command Center, Gallant says IAF preparing for quick transition to offense. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Monday that the military must prepare for a quick transition to offense during a visit to the Israeli Air Force's underground command center in Tel Aviv, amid heightened tensions over an anticipated Iranian and Hezbollah attack on the country. Our enemies are carefully considering their steps thanks to the abilities you have demonstrated in the last year. However, we must prepare for all possibilities, including a quick transition to offense, Gallant said in remarks provided by his office. Gallant observed the IAF's preparations in light of security developments, as well as the possibilities of offensive action in all combat sectors, the defense ministry said. Gallant IDF Chief of Staff General Herzai Halevi, meanwhile, held assessments with the United States CENTCOM Chief General Michael Kurilla, who arrived in Israel Monday as tensions spiraled. Now, speaking of the U.S. arriving, we have some other indicators coming from our side as well. Let's see here. Exile Reviews, I do not want to be president. Do not put that on me. I'm not into that, honestly. But here's what I'll say. If there became some kind of insane scenario where there was no other option and somebody had to do it and everybody looked at me, then I would probably do it, because what are you supposed to do in that moment? Say no? But anything beyond that, like, I'm not trying to get involved in politics, except for maybe on a local level, but that's for a later date and time, right? And that's just because I think getting involved with your community is a good idea, especially if you can have some sway over, I don't know, how some of your emergency funds are being allocated and how you can affect the level of quality of life and survivability for your community. Not the worst thing to have a little bit of influence on, right? But anyway, hello, Prepper Book Club. Good to see you. Let's talk about how the U.S. is showing up as well. We're not just dropping in to have a little talk. Carrier USS Abraham Lincoln heads to the Middle East as Iran threatens strikes against Israel. This is from the U.S. Naval Institute. This was reported on August 2nd. Now, as of right now, the USS Theodore Roosevelt is already in the region, and it had left the Pacific region to come to the Middle East in order to give relief to the Dwight D. Eisenhower, right? Carrier strike group. So these movements are happening, but right now, with the way things are set up currently, we're going to have the USS Theodore Roosevelt and the Abraham Lincoln together in the Middle East. That puts us at 2 strike groups, okay? I want you to keep that in mind as we keep talking about it. Now, it's my understanding that the Abraham Lincoln is supposed to be relieving the Theodore Roosevelt, but there is overlap, and there's a period of time where both are around in the same region, right? I wonder why that might be happening right now. West Coast carrier USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 is setting sail to the Middle East from the Pacific to relieve the carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt CN-71 and its strike group. Meanwhile, the Navy is sending additional ships to the region following threats from Iran, Pentagon officials announced on Friday evening. To maintain a carrier strike group presence in the Middle East, the Secretary has ordered the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group to replace the Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group, currently on deployment in the Central Command area of responsibility, reads the Pentagon statement. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has ordered additional ballistic missile defense-capable cruisers and destroyers to the U.S. European Command and U.S. Central Command regions. The department is also taking steps to increase our readiness to deploy additional land-based ballistic missile defense. The U.S. moves to bolster military presence in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East follows reports that Iranian military officials and proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen will meet to discuss options to retaliate against Israel following the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Okay? Listen, this is a lot of movement. And don't forget, they're mentioning the Eastern Mediterranean here too. It's not just the Middle East, right? And we know that the Eastern Mediterranean has a lot going on. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But this is also a huge indication of anticipation of escalation, right? Our expectation is that these carrier strike groups are going to be needed. And we also know that we're more than willing to aid Israel in any type of support role that we might fulfill. And keep in mind that our support role is us doing it, right? Like this is how these modern wars are being fought right now. Russia is Iran, we are Israel, and then we're going to fight, but not with our names on it, right? But both sides are relying on the other in order to have the logistics and the firepower necessary for it to actually be effective and for them to have a chance at actually winning their fight or at least defending themselves to the point of not being totally destroyed. So that's where we're at right now. These factions are just proxies of the major superpowers, right? I think we all know that, but it's just a good reminder for you that this is how things are being done. We're not sending this carrier strike group there just because. We're not trying to make sure we have additional support in place just because. Like these assets are being planned on being used here, and we're being telegraphed this whole Iranian imminent attack because the expectation is that they're going to do something about it afterward. Right. And Israel just told us that in this last article, how they have plans to go on the offensive right after. Quickly transition to offense, they said, which in my mind means expecting additional offense from Iran thereafter, right? Like when does that stop? It does not. Okay. Now, here's something I want you to be aware of. Okay. Oh, here. Well, before we move into the next little reminder I have for you, it's unclear on the timing of the transition between the two strike groups. Lincoln could take 2 weeks or more to cross the Pacific and Indian Ocean to arrive in the Middle East. Roosevelt, which deployed on January 11th, has been operating in the Middle East since July 12th as part of Operation Prosperity Guardian to protect merchant traffic in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Theodore Roosevelt was moved from the Pacific to the Middle East to keep a carrier in the region and prevent USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and its escorts from being extended a third time. The next East Coast carrier set to head to the region, USS Harry S. Truman, is still off the East Coast and in the midst of its pre-deployment training. So what they're letting us know here is that they're not really sure how the transition is going to work. We don't know what overlap there's going to be. We're not really sure how long they're going to both be in the same region. But if things pop off over there with Israel and Iran, don't be surprised if both strike groups end up hanging around for a while, right? I think that's pretty reasonable to expect. Now, get back in the chat here for a second. Big Chase, good to see you. We have Harry as well. We also have Cherokee Survival. Wooder Dude is here too. Okay. Now, XR Reviews, thanks for joining the channel membership. I appreciate that. All right. Now, this is a reminder of things we've discussed here in the past, but I just want to bring it to your attention one more time. Okay. So this was from 9 months ago. Okay. And this is a live stream from 9 months ago where we discussed watching for this signal and that it will be the signal that the war has gone hot. And it was specifically discussing carrier strike group movements into the area. And in this live stream, if you want to go back and watch it, I'll even pop a link into the live chat right now in case you guys are interested. There we go. Now, here's the thing. Commander Crypt, what's up, dude? Good to see you. In that live stream, I explained that basically once you have 3 strike groups, that's the red alert. That's the signal. So we're, at least for an interim amount of time here, very soon having 2 in the Middle East, and if a third were to join, or if additional assets were to flood the area because of maybe the inability for another group to actually make its way there, right? Regardless, you can look at that as an indicator as to just how big things are about to get. And this whole chat we did 9 months ago talked specifically about this particular situation of having carrier strike groups being sent to the Middle East in anticipation of an attack. And I compared it to historical context of those same movements during the Gulf War and previous wars in the Middle East to kind of show that every time a big major action or invasion or war front started in that area, we had minimum 2 carrier strike groups in the area. And most of the time, 3 was just like guaranteed things were already hot. So if you want to go check that one out, it was a good listen. The video and audio quality is a little sketchy on that one because I think I had a bad signal that night. But this is actually, at least in my opinion, a good indication as to what we're seeing happening right now. And that live stream will give you some historical context as to what to expect next if things develop in a similar fashion to previous wars in the region. Okay. So I think it's good to have those reminders. I'm not trying to say like, oh, I predicted this. No, we're not there yet. But what I will say is that this movement should raise your alert level a little bit. Your awareness should be a little bit higher, and you should have that expectation that this is for a purpose other than just because things have to move around sometimes, right? And that's what that entire live stream was about. It was pointing out all the historical context of where that added up and showed people exactly what was happening based on those types of movements, okay? So let's see here. Gregor Zamina, pizza and Chinese takeout shops have been hand over fist since Friday morning around Pentagon. So at least I have heard. I also heard that as well from S2 Underground. So if y'all don't know, S2 Underground is an excellent source for intelligence. I don't know what else to call it, right? And they do a great job of putting out good intelligence that's very grounded and based on factual information. There's no bias, really. There doesn't seem to be any political bias or specific reason in the sense of like an agenda for why they put out their information. They're just putting it out there in order to give people something to work with to be more aware of what's happening in the world and be better prepared. So I'll put their link to their channel in the live chat right now. If you want to be made aware of that information more regularly, they do a segment called The Wire, which they put out daily, and it gives you a quick update as to like what's happening in the world. And I think it's very valuable. Okay. So Blue Jay Apothecary. What does that even mean, though the restaurants are busy? What it means is that in Washington, D.C., there's a trend, a historical trend, that every time a major event's about to occur, all the restaurants in the area are flooded with to-go orders and with pickup and carry-out orders because everyone that needs to be in D.C. is suddenly there all at once. And so they have to keep feeding all the staff and everyone else who just suddenly arrived, and the restaurants generally can't keep up with the demand. So it's an obvious spike in demand for these food services that isn't usually there. And it's been shown time over time again that you can relate it to like another major event right thereafter, or at least somewhere close in proximity. So that's what it's about. Anyway, speaking of money and food and people who have money or don't have money now, let's move on to the global market crash that's happening right this second because, a lot of people are probably very freaked out today about how bad the markets were doing. And there are some things that we need to discuss about it because financial preparedness should be part of your plan, right? Like you should be considering how you're going to survive just normal daily life too, right? We can't just assume SHTF is going to happen and then we're never going to have to go work our job again. And instead we're going to be picking, dandelions in the wasteland trying to make weird wine, right? Like these are the things that we can prepare for, but if things don't fall apart, you still got to be able to get by and make your way when it comes to paying bills and everything else. And the market right now is not looking good in that regard. And it also is an indicator of how bad things are getting, right? So that's why we should pay attention to these things when they occur. Even if you're not invested in the markets, these things affect you one way or the other, whether or not it's your personal finances or if it's your ability to afford the things that then become more expensive thereafter, right? Like it's a trickle down effect, right? We all know how that works. Huge $6.4 trillion global stock market meltdown could be just the start, traders fear. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the markets like in this regard, but we're also going to talk about how some people are obviously saying like, don't freak out. Now, there's always going to be a bias there, especially when it comes to politics, because people are going to tell you not to freak out no matter what's happening in any event, right? The entire Yellowstone volcano could erupt and like destroy like a third of the country and cover the planet in volcanic ash, right? And a bunch of people would be coming out in the media telling you not to panic and not to worry about it, because this happens every so often. And as long as you can just kind of like hold out for a little bit, like everything will get back to normal, right? And I mean, that's a funny take to have in that event, but like you guarantee you there will be that take. So same thing happening here, which we'll discuss here shortly. But first, let's go over the more exciting headline, let's call it. Ronnie, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Ronnie still blazed as expected, Ronnie. You're awesome. Thanks for the super sticker, okay? Now, a scary Monday that started with a plunge abroad reminiscent of 1987's crash swept around the world and pummeled Wall Street with more steep losses, all right? Not good, but it's an indicator of where we are right now. Wall Street has worst day since 2022 as fear of U.S. economic slowdown deepens. Wall Street fell the most in nearly 2 years, continuing a global rout in financial markets as fear worsens that the U.S. economy is slowing down. The S&P 500 fell 3% by the end of trading on Monday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped more than 1,000 points, and the NASDAQ Composite slid 3.4%. Followed a 12.4% plunge from Japan's Nikkei 225, its worst day since 1987, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. Worries over the economy are front and center after a series of disappointing reports, including a weaker than expected jobs report on Friday. Big tech stocks, which have led the market to record record after record this year, bore the brunt of the selling. Now, the selling is actually a big part of it, not as much just like, oh, a bad jobs report. Major players are selling it off, right? And that's an indication of what's coming as well. They know things we don't. Let's be honest. You know that Warren Buffett gets a heads up before anything bad happens, because that's the amount of influence and power and money they have, right? Like when you're in that position, you get the heads up. You will be told that this thing is going to happen before it happens, whereas I will not and you will not. That's just how these things work, okay? $6.4 trillion global stock market meltdown. That's a lot of money. But here's the thing. $1 trillion of it was lost on Monday from U.S. tech stocks such as Apple and Nvidia. $1 trillion. We lost $1 trillion in the market today when we're $35 trillion in debt, right? Like this is not good when you start adding all the pieces together. Apple fell 4.8% Monday after Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway disclosed that it had slashed its ownership stake in the iPhone maker. Nvidia, the chip company that's become the poster child of Wall Street's AI bonanza, fell even more, 6.4%. Analysts cut their profit forecasts over the weekend for the company after a report from The Information said Nvidia's new AI chip is delayed. People are dumping it, okay? The market is getting thrashed right now. This is another indicator. Okay. Down here, they try to say, it's good for some people because mortgage rates also declined. But be aware of the fact that that's not like, okay, great. For the people who are trying to still buy a house or want to refinance from a higher interest rate, this might help them a tiny bit. But it's not good in general when this big of a downfall occurs. Now, I don't think it's necessarily time to panic, right? I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling anybody to do anything. But what I'm trying to say is like these things do happen. And what you'll likely see, and this is just from my experience and my personal opinion, is that when these things happen, you get this big dip. And then a lot of people are programmed and trained to buy the dip. So you're going to have a rebound. But then who knows how long that rebound can actually hold out until the reality of the situation kicks fully in, right? Especially when the big players like Berkshire Hathaway are dumping their stocks. They're not just waiting to buy on this small rebound, right? They're or buy the dip and then get the small rebound. They're getting out, right? Because of what's coming. Now, in that same vein, let's talk about Japan, just because that's kind of what started the whole shebang. And it can be an indicator for us to kind of see what things might look like here soon based on the fact that they were even worse. And obviously, we're very close trading partners and we're also, military allies. So there's a lot tied in when it comes to our economies. Japan's Nikkei falls 13% in its worst one-day loss since Black Monday of 1987. So this is the worst one-day loss in 37 years for Japan. Now, Japan's had a lot of problems, don't get me wrong. But what I'm trying to say is this should at least make you concerned about the global stability of the economy due to the fact that we're seeing things happen that haven't happened in almost 4 decades, right? That's a big sign of things not going well. I mean, that's just the honest truth. Okay. The Nikkei index was down 12.9% at 31,290.63. It dropped 5.8% on Friday, and it's headed for its worst 2-day decline ever. Japan's Nikkei 225 share index plunged nearly 13% as investors worried that the U.S. economy may be in worse shape than had been expected, dumped a wide range of shares. So understand, these things are linked, right? It's not just like, oh, Japan's doing Japan and then the U.S. is doing the U.S. What's happening to Japan is based on what the U.S. is projecting in the sense of our economic prowess, right? Like, so this is all problematic. All right. Nikkei's biggest single day rout was a plunge of 3,836 points, or 14.9% on the day dubbed Black Monday in October of 1987. It suffered an 11.4% drop in October of 2008 during the global financial crisis and fell 10.6% during the aftermath of massive earthquakes and nuclear meltdowns in northeastern Japan in March of 2011. So be aware that this is worse in a single day for Japan than it was after they got hit by a tsunami and literally had a nuclear reactor melt down, which would hurt any markets in any country, right? So all I'm saying about this, this isn't for you to be making financial moves or using it to your advantage in the sense of, you know, how you're going to profit off it. This information is for you to use as an indicator as someone who's worried about preparedness. I'm using this information to say, okay, it looks like things are getting bad economically. So personally, I'm going to start using this as a way to better position myself in order to get through these difficult economic times if possible, which isn't as easy as it sounds when you just say it, but that is what I'm planning on doing here. So let's see here. Ben, stocks are way overpriced. No use even trying to get some bargains because there aren't any. Fair assessment. That's your opinion. Like I said, I don't give out financial advice, but I can understand where you're coming from. I mean, what isn't overpriced in the United States of America, in all honesty, especially right now, especially when our dollar is devaluating and we also have inflation at the level that it's at? I mean, it's hard to be wrong when you say something like that, right? Now, here's something else to consider. And this is from a more optimistic standpoint, so that's why we're going to discuss it, because, you know, it's going to have both sides of the story here. Stock market today, plunge worries investors, but experts say don't panic. Like I said, in any scenario involving a type of event or a crash or anything else, there will be experts that come out and tell you not to panic. A nuclear bomb could go off in your city, and the emergency management experts will come on the TV or the radio or your cell phone, and they'll say, don't panic. Everything's going to be fine. You know, sit in the most center room in your house and try to tape up your windows, right? So that's what's going to happen. All right. Waking up to the news of a large stock market drop rattled many investors in Chicago and beyond, but those with experience in the field say it's not a reason to panic for most. When the stock market goes up, it takes the stairs. And when it goes down, it jumps out the window. And today, we've jumped out the window from a pretty high floor because we've been going up a lot of stairs, says JJ Kinahan of IG North America and Tasty Trade, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I mean, it's a sensible thing to say. We all know that we're living on a bubble right now, right? Nearly everything on Wall Street tumbled as fear about a slowing U.S. economy worsened and set off another sell-off for financial markets around the world. Okay, it goes into all this stuff, but here's where I think there might be some reasonable advice, okay? And that, like I said, this is not financial advice, but this is what this article is saying about this recent stock market dip. And I think that their strategy here isn't a bad idea or a concept to consider, okay? He urged against making big moves and said to instead use this as an opportunity to evaluate and educate yourself on any investments you have, like your retirement. I would expect the next week or so to be really bumpy. And again, try not to get too high or low during it because we are trying to see what's the new equilibrium of where prices should be, he advised. Okay? At Morningstar Wealth in the Loop, Chief Investment Officer Philip Strahe said the advantage to this volatile market is lower interest rates, which could actually help people looking to borrow money. If you're a homeowner, if you're financing car payments over the next few months, you can see that come through and give you an opportunity to refinance. So in terms of borrowing costs, it's actually good news. So, I mean, I think there's some things there that make a little bit of sense if you're trying to capitalize off of some of this chaos and turmoil. But the biggest thing for me is I agree with the idea of use it as an opportunity to evaluate and educate yourself on any investments you have. And I mean, I think that's what we should all be doing right now when it comes to you have financial preparedness should be part of your preparedness planning, right? Like we all know that if you have money, life is a lot easier. If you don't have money, it makes things a lot more difficult. And that same exact mantra applies to anything else related to preparedness, right? If I have food, it's easier to survive than if I don't have food. So it's all the same. It just depends on how you prioritize. And right now, with all this volatility, you should at least be learning from it, right? Like that would be my suggestion. Like read about it, get yourself involved in some, I don't know, mental exercises regarding how markets work and fluctuate and how investments work and everything else. Like learning money is just like learning comms or just like learning, armorers, gunsmithing and stuff like that. Like it's just another skill. And yeah, it's a skill that's not necessarily as valuable when the lights go out, right? But it's a skill that's extremely valuable when the lights are on. So, like I said, prioritization, right? But that's just my thought process. So we have discussed the global market crash as of right now. It is probably going to get worse, but we'll see as time goes on. And I do expect there to be a weird rebound because there almost always is. So just be aware of that. What up, America? Well, Bakaria Akil Bay, I say what up as well. How you doing? And then we have Christo Chaos. Christo just says chaos to bring order. Prepare, dudes and ladies. Now, I agree with that. Let's talk about that. All right. So the UK has a lot of unrest going on right now. And there's a lot of interesting reports about it, right? There's a lot of bias going into how they're approaching the information regarding these protests and regarding the unrest and regarding the rioting, right? And here's the thing. Here, at least in my realm, where I try to provide, relevant information, I don't sugarcoat things and I also don't beat around the bush. Just because these people are right-wing doesn't mean they're not rioting, right? They're burning stuff and they're looting places. They're rioting. So if we could all be on the same page and just call things what they are, regardless of who's doing it, that makes life a little bit easier, right? So that's what's happening. But at the same time, I would expect the same level of respect and dignity from anyone arguing against that, right? So regardless, though, there's reasons behind why this is happening. Of course, we know that. These reasons are, at least in my opinion, not organic. The people were forced into the position in many ways, and I think that we can all see why. And I think that there's a good reason to believe that this is where we're heading here in the U.S., but all these things have to happen in these other European, westernized societies first. Why is that? It's because they don't have guns. I don't know what else to say, but it's just the truth. Like, you just can't do the same things here in the U.S. that you can do in other places because, well, anyway, let's just talk about it, all right? So, first off, let's talk about how widespread these riots are here in the UK right now. Mapped. Violent protests grip the country with fears of more to come. All right. Listen, someone earlier in the chat said, that they're basically rooting for the UK Patriots and everything else. I'm not against what they're doing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against what's happening there. But if you were to phrase it in the way the media is reporting on it, then it would be hard to not be against it because the way it's being reported on is that everyone is just there for their frustrations regarding things of a racial nature, right? Which is the easiest way for a news outlet to report on something that they want you to dislike. Because how do you argue against that, right? Well, I don't want people being out there being racist, right? Like, that's a pretty basic statement to say as a regular human being that understands that this is all division created artificially in order to not let us like each other and work as a community, right? But that's what's happening there. But the reasons and the root causes for a lot of it are understandable, right? I can say that much. But the outcome is predictable because this is all done by design, at least in my opinion. And we're going to go through it all. And the reason we're doing that is because I expect this to happen here in the U.S. too. Okay? Now, why am I saying that? I mean, we've already done it here in the U.S., but it's just going to be worse. Here we go. Okay. Nearly 150 people have been arrested following violence and disorder across the country over the weekend, with police warning that further violence is likely in the coming days. They're just going to let you know that. Several towns and cities in England and Northern Ireland saw violent crashes involving far-right demonstrators, with dozens of police officers left injured. There was unrest in Manchester, Hull, Liverpool, Bristol, Stoke-on-Trent, Blackpool, Rotherham, Middlesbrough, and Belfast, with missiles thrown and shops looted. Yes, missiles just means projectiles in the UK, so we're talking like rocks or bottles or who knows what else. The string of violent incidents over the past few days began on Tuesday in Southport after 3 girls were killed in a knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed holiday club. Yes, this was the catalyzing event, but this is not the singular event that created the unrest. This is a buildup of many, many, many things and many grievances that the people of that particular thought process have had enough of, right? The string of violent incidents over the past few days began on Tuesday. Oh, we already did that. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer vowed rioters would regret engaging in far-right thuggery and face the full force of the law. The interactive map below shows the towns and cities where there was disorder and the number of arrests made. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because it shows you how widespread this unrest is throughout that country. This is not an isolated incident. This is not in a singular location. This is all over the UK. All right. Now, Law of the Minimum said, MP, my favorite prepper anthem song to play when loading mags or stashing Mylar bags is Bad Moon Rising by CCR. Which one is yours? You know what? That's a tough one. I listen to a lot of weird music. I listen to a lot of metal because I find it energizing and it keeps me awake and moving and getting stuff done. But I'm a big fan lately of Tesla, Modern Day Cowboy, just because it has a lot of Cold War themes that seem to be repeating themselves these days, and I enjoy the song quite a bit. So there's that. Anyway, and that's not the type of metal I'm referring to generally, like hair metal, right? But like I like hair metal. Don't get me wrong. I'm definitely basic like that. But I listen to some harder stuff too, just because I like fast music. Anyway, okay. The reason we're going over this is because I want to show you how widespread this can be. So throughout the country, we're seeing a lot of activity from this particular protest/riot event. The far right has drawn condemnation from MPs across the political spectrum after disorder in London, Manchester, Southport, and Hartlepool came before the weekend's violence. False claims had spread online that the suspect, later identified as a 17-year-old Axel Radakubana from Lancashire, was an asylum seeker who had arrived in the UK by boat in 2023. Turns out he was born there to his parents, who are from Rwanda, I believe. And there's a lot of misinformation being spread around according to the authorities, but at the same time, there's a lot of misinformation being spread around as to the root causes of what these protests and what these riots are about, because that's where a lot of this is starting to kind of like fall apart. There were ugly scenes of anti-immigration rioters attacking police and smashing the windows of a hotel in Rotherham on Sunday as the atmosphere turned increasingly febrile on the 6th day of unrest in England. Masked men hurled lengths of wood, chairs, and bottles and sprayed fire extinguishers at officers outside after some 700 people gathered. Okay, at least 10 officers were injured. This is what's happening. It's unrest. I don't know what to tell you. You should expect this to happen here. Now, let's talk about, oh, and by the way, they torched a hotel that was harboring migrants, apparently, which is what they said here. I'm trying to actually pull that back up. Yeah, maybe I missed it on this article, but that is one of the things that's being reported. Look, that just goes to show you how quickly this can escalate and turn into something a little bit more violent, right? So, now, I'm sure at this point, hello, Northern Girl Hobbies. Thanks for being here. Thank you for modding. I'm sure at this point, I have upset a lot of people by not just buying in fully to whatever's happening there, right? Look, I don't live in the UK, so I can't say for sure what everyone's motivations are or what their intentions are. I can say that there's a lot of people who are very pissed off. I know that much. And I can say there's a lot of people who have reasonable grievances with how the government there has been handling things for a long, long time now. And I think that feeling like you have nowhere else to turn besides action is a real thing that happens all over the world all the time. And even in America, when it came to the BLM riots and things of that nature, I mean, regardless of what stoked those flames and what pushed those people to act in that regard, they truly believed, or at least the ones who were passionately there as legitimate protesters, right? Not the instigators and the outside instigators who were bussed in by those with the influence, let's just say. But the people who were actually there for the reasons that they believed in felt that they were in the same position. They had nowhere else to turn, and no one was, doing no. When the police aren't on your side, what do? Right? Like, that's their thought process, which is, like I said, an understandable grievance to have at a certain point where you feel like the only option is to do something, right? Things are bad in the UK when Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland are marching together. Exactly. And that is also happening. Now that you guys understand that I'm not trying to promote any certain particular concept that's happening here, what I am trying to demonstrate is that this unrest is by design in many ways. And it was designed over many, many years, where rights were eroded, where people were treated differently based on their status of citizenship. People have ignored some of the biggest problems that are happening in these communities, and people who are elected no longer have the citizenry at the forefront of priority. Instead, they are prioritizing those who may not be citizens, right? Or may not be prioritizing the safety of their citizens in order to not offend those who may not be, right? There's a lot to the whole deal. And it's not good, okay? But here's the thing. This is done for the purpose of Robert Larson. Don't get me started on rat. This is done with the purpose of, because by the way, David Hicks, I love rat. It's done with the purpose of dividing everybody and creating this chaos. And what this chaos does is it allows the power players to profit and benefit from it and implement more forms of control as the solution. And that's exactly what's happening in the UK right now. And that's exactly why these things are being put into place and allowed to spawn from years and years of neglect or purposeful, intentful action that is basically created to poke the bear, right? So what am I talking about? So all this is happening, right? And it's been happening in the UK for a while, but this is like a big one now, right? Things are really spilling over. After these girls lost their lives and all these other girls and parents were stabbed in this attack, the people who are already upset about, well, the safety of their communities, right? And that's the thing. The media is spinning a lot of this as being solely based on racial tension, but a lot of it's based on the safety and security of the communities no longer being a priority for the authorities. And the people who live in these communities no longer feel safe and don't feel that their government is doing anything in order to make sure they are safe. And therefore, they only have one other option, which is to let them know that they're no longer okay with what's happening, right? Like, I don't know how else to say it. And like I said, I mean, you could correlate this to even groups like the BLM riots from 2020, because some of those people who were legitimately there with legitimate concerns honestly didn't feel safe anymore. And the only people they could turn to were the ones that they thought made them unsafe in the first place. So their only action was to do something, right? Which I'm not defending those actions. I will never defend the concept of burning down buildings and everything else in the sense of trying to get a point across. But that's where we're at. So I have to be honest with myself when it comes to these things. I can't just deny one, label of a group just because they're on the right and then apply it to a group that's on the left. Like, we have to be, if you want to be as prepared as you possibly can be, and you want to actually be ready to deal with the repercussions of these dangerous scenarios, you can't do it out from a point of bias. You have to be reasonably and logically honest with yourself and with what's happening. You can't just deny what's in front of your face just because it doesn't represent a political bias or something that you're used to participating in, right? Just my opinion. And that's how, like, the best way to survive any situation is to be as logical as possible. That's why I tell you not to panic, right? And you can't be logical if you're letting bias guide your decision-making process. And that's why Spock usually was the guy to listen to in Star Trek, right? Now, Kirk got him out of a lot of situations thanks to his passion, but I think a lot of that was plot armor and writers, not necessarily real life, right? Which we all know Star Trek is real life, so it obviously applies. UK Prime Minister talks of standing army of police to deal with rioting across Britain. Oh, here's the solution. Who would have thought that the problem that was created by those who were in power in the first place would also have a solution created by those who are in power? This is what it is now. This is where this division comes from. This is what these people want in order to implement these forms of control, and also in order to profit off of your house being burned to the ground. If you don't know, I read a report recently. I don't have the numbers exactly. I could probably find out. Give me 1 second. I'll just search it up real quick. Yeah, we can figure that out. Nice and easy, okay? Okay, so, well, maybe not that easy. But I can tell you this. There's some crazy number, but I wanted to say it was as far as 60% of Ukraine has been bought up by BlackRock now, right? And the information I'm getting right now off of a quick little search is telling me stuff like they bought 32 million hectares of land in Ukraine, but that's like a 2-year-old story at this point. And so I can't find the story super fast to where I'm not wasting everyone's time here. But the point of it is that through war and destruction and chaos, you can make a crap load of money off real estate, right? How do you buy up real estate on the cheap if everything's going fine? How do you buy it on the cheap if everything's just dandy, right? You can't. So what do? Well, you burn it down to the ground, and then you buy the rubble for pennies on the dollar. And then since you already got all the money in the world, it's not that hard to just build it back with something cheaper and shoddier and probably lesser than what was there originally, and then charge more to sell it or rent it thereafter, right? Here we are. Yep, Osmond, well, that went fast. Osmond Holistic said, yep, exactly. They were invited, right? So don't expect anything less from everywhere else in the world right now either. This is what's happening. But not to mention the side effect of implementing the police state and the control state in the process in order to maintain the status quo and the ability to actually keep that property value up thereafter. If you burn everything down and turn it into a war zone, and then you rebuild in that war zone, how do you get the property value back up to where you make your profit? Oh, well, I know. You implement extremely draconian forms of control, so that way the people there have to behave. And guess what? No more war zone. Now everything's nice and safe, and we can sell you this property for a lot of money. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Monday that a standing armor of specialist police would be set up to deal with rioting and that the justice system would be ramped up to handle hundreds of arrests after violent disorder rocked cities across the nation over the past week. A standing army of specialist police. What does that sound like to you? What other historical events had like a standing army of specialist police? Do you remember there was this weird group, and I want to say it was like with 2 letters, and they had lightning bolts as part of their symbol, and they would go around and they would round up anybody who was a dissenter or who might cause trouble. I can't put my finger on it, but there was this group of police who were like a standing army that used to take out any opposition before it became a problem. Anyway, that's what they want to do in the UK now, thanks to these riots that are happening. Right? It's not because of the criminal state that the country has become. It's not because of the rampant crime. It's not because of the lack of involvement of the police. And it's not because the safety of the average UK citizen at this point has diminished and become much more dangerous. No. It's because of these rioters and these crazy right-wing rioters that we have to implement a standing army of specialist police. Okay? So Starmer convened an urgent meeting after lawlessness he blamed on far-right thuggery that was driven in part by misinformation on social media. See, they keep repeating the same thing over and over again in order for you to be aware of the fact that this is all because of false news, right? So not only do we have the standing police being required here, not only do we have the far-right thuggery being labeled as the actual problem and the bad guy at this point, but we also have social media and misinformation being a huge reason for why your neighborhood is burning down. So obviously we need more controls and to implement stricter applications in the sense of social media, so that way we can prevent more of this misinformation in the future from causing all of this damage, right? So this was all false rumors spread online that the suspect was a Muslim asylum seeker led to attacks on immigrants and mosques. Now, that's what we're being told by most of the mainstream outlets. However, there's a lot of reports and there's a lot of people from within that have said things along the lines of like, like they know this person was born in the UK. They know this person wasn't this misinformation person that everyone's talking about. They are upset that this is just one more example of somebody not from there killing children, right? This is what happened. I mean, they're from there, but their family's not, right? That's just what's the truth here. But then also how this is just another example of that crime and that element of crime getting worse and worse and worse and nothing being done about it. That's what's really happening here. But that obviously the media and the misinformation is actually the real problem. Whatever the apparent motivation, right? There we go. Like, just to throw that out there, by the way, we don't want to assume anything, even though we've told you every little reason for why this is happening. Whatever the apparent motivation, this is not protest. It is pure violence, and we will not tolerate attacks on mosques or our Muslim communities, Starmer said. The full force of the law will be visited on all those who are identified as having taken part in these activities. Now, a lot of people are bringing up the point here that the prime minister is saying that they're going to defend, mosques and Muslim communities, which is understandable, right? Like, you're as someone who's in the authority, no matter how corrupt or whatever you might be, regardless, like that's the stance, right? You're going to protect the community, you're going to protect the buildings, you're going to protect the religious institutions, right? But to specifically say they're protecting these communities and these institutions specifically is interesting because a big part of the problem here and a big part of what's spurring on these riots is the fact that people feel they're being treated unfairly based on their religious or ethnic orientations, right? And because of that, then you have the prime minister coming out who, in general, you would assume should be trying to calm things or try to, at least promote the idea of like a peaceful solution or whatever it might be. But instead, immediately he just says, like, we know exactly what's happening here. This is only racial, and we're only worried about protecting the people who are being victimized right now by these mobs, which is like literally what the problem these people have is a sense of like not being prioritized, right? Or whatever. Like, so just as easily you could have said, well, like, we're going to attacks on, on our religious institutions and our communities will not be tolerated. Same exact thing, same exact words, but without the implication of only caring about one particular group of people or their particular religion. Now, look, should they protect those buildings and those people? Well, obviously they're the authority, so that's what their job is, right? Regardless of how everyone feels about the situation. But it just goes to show you that these things are happening on purpose. Like, this person is saying these things with purpose. This is not just word salad that he accidentally spewed out. These are well-chosen, thought out sentences that are being put together for a particular purpose. On Sunday, angry mobs attacked 2 hotels used to house asylum seekers, breaking windows and lighting fires before police dispersed the crowds and residents were evacuated. Dozens of police officers have been hospitalized for injuries in the past 6 days after being struck with bricks, bottles, and large wooden posts. More than 375 people have been arrested in the mayhem so far, and more are expected, the National Police Chiefs Council said. Many made court appearances Monday and found themselves facing at least several weeks behind bars awaiting their next court hearing. That sounds a lot like what happened in January of 2021 here. I don't think these people are going to be let out very soon, do you? Okay, so listen, a lot of what's happening there are riots. People are looting. There are things happening that we would, in general, not agree with, right? But we have to understand that this was done with purpose. And these power brokers, they understand what groups are the most vulnerable to being provoked into this type of behavior, right? Especially based on where the fever pitch is and the actual concerns and grievances at hand. And this particular group has a lot of, at least in my opinion, legitimate grievances in the sense of how they feel about their treatment regarding the bias and the I guess we'll just say that it's obvious differentiation between certain groups of people within the country and how they're treated when it comes to enforcement of the law. So obviously that's going to create a rift, right? Let's hear. Joe Lai. Hi, Magic Prepper. Longtime sub first on the live stream. Well, I'm glad you're here. I appreciate you being a longtime sub. That's super cool. And I'm glad you made a live stream. So that's really awesome. Thank you so much. 58 minutes, says Cherokee Survival. I'm good with it. Don't worry. Now, here's the thing. James Dark, my hair matches Tulsi. That's true. But, I don't know what else to say. I was just going to say, I haven't really stumbled on the Second Amendment at some point in time in my life. So here we are. But anyway, other than living in California, but you can't really blame me for that, right? So let's keep talking about this a little bit more. Here's the thing. These things are going to happen here in the same exact form and fashion, and the solution is already set up, right? Oh, these groups, so it's either going to be right-wing extremists or it's going to be left-wing anarchists, right? Like they have the groups figured out already. They already have them in place. They have everything set up. They've already got the flyers, right? They've got the social media accounts. They've got everything ready to go. And they got to figure out which one they have the most leverage against in order to provoke into incendiary action, right? So once they get that, once they have that figured out, they will then push those people to the edge. They'll make them do something. And then the response to that will be, well, I mean, I don't know, maybe a standing army of specialized police, maybe a surveillance situation regarding your social media and whether or not that will allow you to travel freely throughout the country. Or, well, maybe be able to have commerce when it comes to transactions at certain locations or certain event centers, right? Like maybe some of your recent posts exclude you from being able to go to a concert because it's a public arena and there's a lot of people and there are a lot of safety concerns, so we don't really know if we can have you here, right? So like that is what you should expect to see in the UK. They're talking about it openly. They're telling you right now they're gonna get a standing army of a specialized police force, which is literally like like history repeats itself. Yep, I guess they're cool with a lot of the stuff that happened in the the 1930s and 40s. So here we go, but that's what they're going to, and they're using this particular scenario as a reason to implement it. And this scenario is only in existence because of the conditions that they created in order to provoke this type of a reaction. And that's why I feel like this is all very well planned. Not just an organic movement. Now, the people who are part of the movement are probably doing it organically at heart because that's what they feel they have to do. But they have, in many ways, most likely been played to a certain degree, which I'm sure some of them are aware of, but it's just how it works. Now, just so you guys have some additional context here, right? A big part of the whole deal there with these riots and the unrest going on in the UK, and I was going to share an article about it, but I don't think that's necessary, especially because we're already at an hour, right? But what it comes down to is for many, many years in the UK, there's been a lot of issues, especially issues revolving around, racial tensions and migration and all sorts of stuff like that. But for a long time, they've been dealing with what's called, grooming rings, right? And they've had lots of issues with young British women being abused and trafficked, and the authorities basically not getting involved. And yes, all ethnic groups are involved in this type of behavior, but there was some specific neighborhoods and towns where there was a large majority of this behavior being predominantly conducted by a certain ethnic group. And because of that, the authorities, and this has been literally quoted by certain authorities, including, attorneys as well as police and people who are involved in arresting and prosecuting people, have literally said that they were afraid to get involved or afraid to do anything about it for fear of being called racist or for fear of losing their position or whatever else it might be. So a lot of this stuff is being ignored because of the predominant ideology in these institutions. And that's why a lot of these people are so upset, because this stuff's been happening for decades now and no one has fixed it. Nothing has been done about it. Thousands of young girls in the UK have been victimized by these rings of abusers, and the authorities won't do anything about it. And that is a lot of what has finally catalyzed this movement into becoming what it is. And the problem is that it's not just about this recent stabbing. That stabbing is just an example and a symbol of what the communities in the UK have become from this inaction and from this looking the other way style of policing as well as prosecuting, right? And so, like I said, all ethnic groups are involved, which is the truth of any crime, right? You can find a crime where one person of every race on the planet has committed this crime, right? But in some of these areas, there was predominant groups who were being not necessarily protected, but ignored due to the fact that those who would have the capability of doing something about it were concerned about what it would do to their reputation within their organizations. And that is where a huge amount of this concern comes from, right? And I think we can all agree here that those types of people and those types of abusers don't have any place in our communities and don't have any place really on the face of the earth, right? But it has been left alone. And then you have to question, is that being left alone for a purpose? And in my opinion, it is, okay? Because it could be very easily remedied. But those who are at the top have specifically given orders clearly that if someone gets involved, they're going to lose their job or possibly be ostracized or who knows, even arrested, right? Because they'll do that in the UK. They'll just arrest you for being mean, right? So those people who have created those policies are the ones to blame, but they also are aware, those, like, you have to understand, these people are aware of the fact that if they let these things go on for long enough, that it'll eventually create either a few different things: unrest, vigilantism, or just all-out violence. And all of those things are good for business. They will be able to implement more power. They will be able to seize property and profit off of the chaos. And then at the end of it all, they'll have more money and more power than they did before. And that's exactly what they're seeing in the UK right now, in my opinion. And that's exactly what we should expect here in the US as well, because they're going to try the same stuff here. They've already tried a few times. And like I said, one of the biggest differences for us is the guns. And if they eventually get their way on trying to get rid of those somehow, well, that's probably when having them is going to make the most sense, right? So be aware, we're on borrowed time right now, and thankfully the founding fathers of this country had some foresight to say, there's one thing that could stop somebody from being able to do a bunch of crap to you don't want them to do, right? And yeah. So MF James, as usual, cops are complicit in tyranny. Well, here's the thing, MF James, and this is just from my personal experience. And we're going to end it out tonight with this little philosophy for you, right? There are 100% bad cops out there. There are 100% good cops out there as well. Some of these policing institutions are much more corrupt and much more infected with ideology than others, especially in major metropolitan areas. These large city police departments can't avoid the corruption. It's just part of the deal. Over time, things become more corrupted, right? And when we know that the more power you have, the more corruption you usually have as well. So, of course, entities like the NYPD, for example, are going to have an impossible time of not being involved in corruption of some sort. So if you want to talk to police to give you some ideas about, I guess, the ones who maybe are still on our side, I highly suggest involving yourself with your local sheriff's department, because they're county-based. They're not beholden to a mayor or to a particular municipality, and they are a elected position. The sheriff is elected as an official rather than just somebody who's appointed by a mayor or someone else in power. So my suggestion on, if you want to have at least some concept of like the police who might still be some of the good guys who are out there, the sheriff's department's your best bet for exploring that avenue. But in an authoritative state, in a martial law scenario, and in some sort of a tyrannical overreach type environment, yes, you should be very concerned about what the police may or may not do in those environments. It's just the truth. But it's just my personal experience that I've had good relationships with many police officers who are out there. I have good conversations with them where I understand that most of the ones I've interacted with are regular people who are just working a job, who do have a righteous indignation to protect others and to protect our Constitution, right? But trust me, when I lived in the metropolitan areas of California, the police department officers did not like me and didn't want to have anything to do with me, right? But the times I interacted with a sheriff deputy, we had a pleasant conversation, and I usually wasn't in any sort of trouble, right? So, like, it is what it is. It is what it is. But I can't paint everyone with the broad brush, just like we shouldn't be doing to other Americans either. And unfortunately, the ones who pull the strings have done a really good job of making us paint each other with that broad brush and assuming that the only way for us to get along is to not get along. And it's really frustrating because just for a lot of people, it's like, just go outside, man. Go outside, knock on your neighbor's door, introduce yourself, and 90% of the time, depending on where you live, right? But like most of the time, they'll probably just be a nice person and you'll have a good conversation and maybe exchange phone numbers in case of an emergency. And there you go. Now you actually know who your neighbor is, right? And it won't matter, what religion they are, what race they are, what gender they are, what sexuality they are. Any of those things won't matter because you're going to have to live next to each other no matter what. But I bet you they'll probably be nice. And if they're not, you need to know that too. Because in an emergency, that could be bad. So obviously, do things in a safe manner. Don't just go knocking on doors because I said so. But I'm trying to use that as an example of how most people really just are, right? So, listen, I talked a lot tonight, but there's a lot to talk about. And the thumbnail of tonight's live stream just said dumpster fire. You know why? Because that is exactly what everything is right now. And I'm sorry, but we are not on a good trajectory. The economy is slowly crapping itself. It's not good. It's not good. And people will spin it however they want, but it's not good. So prepare yourself for more struggle. Prepare yourself financially as best you can by being well-read on what's out there for you when it comes to information regarding how to understand finances and what kind of strategies you might want to implement based on current environment. And understand that the unrest in the UK, that's coming here. I don't know in what form or what fashion or from what level of ideology, but I do know that we are being forced into those scenarios because of what's benefiting those who are in power thereafter. And when they can get their, standing army of specialized police and they can get their surveillance state and they can get their, social credit score and all the other things put into place because of the unrest that they created in which we become enemies somehow. Just remember this conversation. So you guys are awesome. You're all very awesome. I appreciate every single one of you showing up here on Monday nights. I appreciate every single one of you being part of the community. If you want to hit a like button, that'd be cool with the old thumbs up because I'm supposed to tell you that. It does help fight the Olgo that's on top of everybody. And it also would help if you hit the subscribe button and shared the video because these are things that we need to discuss here in the preparedness community. And I try my best to be transparent and honest with you about my actual opinion on what's happening. And sometimes it's going to make somebody mad, and that's just part of the deal. So I can't help you on that. But what I can do is maybe convince you to keep preparing, right? So stay prepping. If you are a channel member, you can be in the private live stream, which starts in about 3 minutes. If you are a Subscribe Star member, you can also be part of the private live stream. If you want to join the channel membership, hit the join button down below and you can jump into the private live stream. That link will be on the community tab on my channel page. If you want to join the Subscribe Star, it's $5 a month. You get into the private live stream as well. You also have direct communication. There's exclusive content over there. And every so often, I may or may not provide somebody with a preparedness related item in order to say thank you. So please feel free to do either one of those things. And if not, because things are tough right now and times are tough, which I totally understand, I still appreciate you being here. And all the information I put on the channel is free. And I do not hold any relevant information behind a paywall. So none of the private live stream stuff is going to be important for you to hear when it comes to your preparedness. Anyhow, anything else you need from me, you know where to go, magicprepper.com. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.